I'm Barry Johns, and this is Studio Talk. If you're watching this video right now, you're probably considering getting into creating a home recording setup so you can record your music at home in the privacy of your spare bedroom, your living room, or wherever it may be. That's where a lot of folks like myself do that. This is a spare room in my home that I've converted to my recording studio. Now, don't be intimidated. You don't need all this stuff back there that I've got back there to make great recording. So let me get that out of the way first. But before I talk about this subject, if you could do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, okay? If you like the content I put out and you find this video helpful, do me a favor and subscribe. It helps me grow the channel so I can get to more people and help more people like you. Okay, so it really doesn't matter how old you are getting started here. You know, you could be a teenager, you could be in 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, or beyond. It's never too late to start recording at home. Regardless of your motivation for wanting to do so, we're going to talk about the basic fundamentals of what you need to be able to get started. First up, you're going to need a computer, okay? If you really want to take advantage of full recording, yes, there are things out there that give you the ability to record to your mobile phone or your iPad or something like that. But at the end of the day, if you really want to be able to reach its potential, you need what's called a digital audio workstation. So that's number 2. So you've got a computer and then a digital audio workstation. A lot of folks call them DAW or DAW. I tend to call them DAW, but I think most people probably call it DAW, short for digital audio workstation. And so we'll talk about that in a second. And then next, you need a recording interface. Now, what this does is it will convert your analog signal coming in into a digital signal so it can be manipulated within your digital audio workstation. That's what they call in the box. When you're doing all of your mixing, all of your EQ, your compression, the various things that you'll learn about as you grow with all of this, you do that all inside the box using what's called plugins, okay? Now, if you're not sure what I mean, I'm going to oversimplify this, but what I mean by analog to digital, so say, for example, you've got a microphone that you're singing into, or you're recording an acoustic guitar, or whatever source you may want to record, okay? That is what's called an analog signal, right? But that needs to be converted into a digital signal, okay? And so that's what your recording interface does. And then if you go back out of your computer, out of your digital audio workstation into a set of either headphones or a set of stereo recording monitors being speakers, okay, then that has to be recorded from digital back to analog. So a recording interface records analog to digital, allows you to manipulate that within your digital audio workstation, and then when you're ready to go play it in other places and other locations through speakers in an analog world, it will convert that back from digital back to analog. So those 3 components make up the core. There are other things around that, but you can certainly get started with just those 3 things, assuming you have a microphone. I think that's probably basic common sense. If you're going to be recording audio sources, you're going to have a microphone, and you're going to have whatever instruments or musical thing, whatever that's a vocal mic, a rap, or whatever it may be, you're going to need a microphone for that, and you would connect that into your recording interface. Now, a lot of folks today do what's called, EDM music or electronic music and things like that. All of that can be done all inside the box, okay? And so you can do that within your digital audio workstation using what's called virtual instruments. I don't want to get too far into this at this point because I really want to break down these 3 components, and then later on, we'll talk about some of the specifics and how to set these things up in a future video. So this is what you need to get started. So because you've got to figure out your budget, how much money do you have to spend, and how much money should you spend if you're just getting into this? Because as you can imagine, just like anything else in the world, you can buy a new car for $12,000 or you can buy a new car for hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So you're going to get what you pay for in that sense. Now, the great thing about things today is you can get some digital audio workstations relatively inexpensive as it relates to this particular hobby. And you can also get some great recording interfaces that will certainly serve you well until you outgrow it at a later stage down the road. But don't worry about that. Get started with the basics and the fundamental. But first, let's talk about the computer. The computer is the core of your home recording setup today. It is the core, whereas back in the day when I actually started recording, it was to tape. Everything was to tape. And so whether that was a 16 channel or a 24 channel 2-inch tape as an example and 24 as an example, or whether it was something simple like a cassette-based 4-track or 8-track unit, or maybe you've got a small little reel-to-reel that's an 8-track recorder. All that was done to analog tape back in the day. But thank goodness today we can do all this within our computer at a fraction of the cost. It was very, very expensive to do it back then. Today it's actually relatively economical. Now, that said, getting into this, don't expect to, dedicate a couple $100 and fully get into that. It's going to take more, and I'll do later videos on how to really pick the right interfaces. I've already got a few out there already, and the things that you need to look for when you're trying to find what you want to buy. But for right now, we're going to talk about the components. Like I said, the computer is super important. Now, you can record with a Mac operating system or a Windows operating system. There was a time relatively a ways back, not that far back, where Windows really was not a great option because of some issues associated. But we're way past that now. Today, recording on a Windows computer compared to a Mac computer are just equal. It just boils down to personal preference and the user interface and just the way they work in general, okay? So let's first talk about Mac, okay? Now, I'm a Mac user, but I've built many Windows PCs. Actually, recently, I built my son a gaming desktop and showed him how to do that. So later on, when he wants to do that on his own, he now knows how to do that. And so we built that, and it's a very powerful machine. But when you're building a computer, you're selecting the individual components for it. Whereas if you just buy an inexpensive Windows computer off the shelf, right, the chances are pretty strong you're likely to have some issues associated with that. And the reason being is a lot of the internal components, okay, they're integrated into the motherboard. They're not, in other words, you don't have a separate video card, a separate analog I/O out of it, a separate Ethernet cord, a separate Thunderbolt card. A lot of that stuff tends to be integrated into it. The reason they're able to make them so inexpensive is because they can integrate all of that, which they're not super, super powerful, but they can get most desktop needs or laptop needs done by most people, whether that's surfing the web or Microsoft Office or some fundamental things like that. But to get into digital audio recording, you need a properly spec'd computer. Now, you can build a Windows machine that is quite easy, to be honest with you, or you can have someone build it for you if you really want to go the Windows route. You can build that component. It's actually very easy. YouTube is your friend. Lots of videos out there showing you how to do it. It's almost like a Rector set. Today, it's very, very, very easy. I've built probably 30 or 40 of them over the last 20 years or so for friends and things like that. So it's actually very easy. So, of course, I say that because I built a lot of them, but I didn't know the first thing about it the first time I did it, and the first time I did it, it was very easy, okay? So let's move on from that. You really want to go that route so you can pick the individual components, right? But that's going to take some computer knowledge and some research. What CPU to get? Do you get an i7, i9? Which version of those should you get? Your internal components like your hard drive. Do you want to go with an internal SSD or an NVMe drive? Okay, these are all things that you have to kind of decide. We don't have to. You can always change that later on, but it's certainly better if you can get all that worked out further in advance. And you want to get a really great USB 3.2 or a Thunderbolt card for that computer to be able to connect your interface, right? Because that's how your recording interface connects. It's either going to be Thunderbolt or it's going to be USB, okay? So in a Windows stuff, it makes a little thing. But if let's say you've got an older Windows machine laying around and you want to get into it, you could get lucky, depending on which one you have. But the odds are you probably may have some problems associated with that. Now, that has nothing to do with Windows whatsoever. Windows is a perfectly fine operating system. They've come a long way, and I actually enjoy working on the most recent versions of Windows. But that said, it's really about the components inside. Now, the difference between a Windows and a Mac is Macs are designed from the ground floor up just to work right out of the gate. You plug it in, it simply just works. You don't need to download drivers. You don't need to do anything. You simply just plug it in and it works. Now, you pay a premium for that price. Macs historically are more expensive than Windows Computer if you build, like a like one for a like one. But that said, since the introduction of Apple Silicon, it's really been a game changer for what we do. They're no longer using Intel-based CPUs like they had in the majority of Windows, either Intel or AMD. So they've developed their own system that cross-utilizes the GPU and the CPU and the memory. They all share components with each other to make them incredibly powerful. As an example, they just came out with the new M2 Mac Mini, which is a phenomenal deal, I have an M2 Mac Mini Pro sitting in my kitchen right now that I'm going to be doing some tests against, performance tests in the audio world. Also comparing it to my current M1 Pro MacBook Pro laptop, and I also have an M1 Mac Mini, and I'll be comparing it to those to see whether it's justified in bumping up to that next level of the M2 versus the M1. But that said, the M1 Mac Mini is a wonderful machine to get going on, and they actually lowered the price when they came out. And if I remember correctly, I think it's $599, so $600 for a very, very, very powerful computer for that amount, especially as it relates to Mac. Okay. So that's a compelling thing. If you happen to be, depending on where you are in your life, if you happen to be in high school or college, you can get the student discount and get $100 off that and get it for $499. If you happen to be, an adult and you've got kids going to elementary or junior high or high school or in college, you can actually use them and buy under student education under them as long as you've got at least one still going to school, whether it's public or secondary, okay? So anyway, those are options that you can choose if you go along. So think long and hard about the computer. That will be important because all of the power comes from the computer. The other things just to take advantage of that power to do what they do, okay? So I'm hoping I didn't overcomplicate that too much, but the message, if you're walking away from this right now, is you need a reasonably fast computer to do this today, and an integrated Windows machine can cause problems. Not all of them. But the more expensive you get into it, the more expensive the whole thing goes. So kind of keep that in mind. Next up, we'll talk about the recording interface. Here's where you've got to figure out what is it you're recording. So how many ins and outs do you need? As an example, right? Most people at home can probably get by with a 2-channel interface. If you're just recording vocals and let's say, for example, you're recording a guitar amp and maybe you have 1 or 2 mics on that guitar amp, those are 2 sources that you're recording at a time. And so a lot of people can get by with just that, especially if you're just getting started. So there's lots of options anywhere in the low 200s to the upper 300s, pushing 400, okay? And so there's a lot of options in there for that. And so you'll want to seek that out to find out what's best for you. But there's certainly great options in the conversion, meaning the quality of the recording signal is very high today compared for the entry-level interfaces than it was maybe 10 years ago. So you want to get that recording interface. But let's say, for example, you want to be able to track an entire drum kit, right? Well, you're going to need at least an 8-channel interface minimum to really be able to do that effectively. Otherwise, you're making compromises. And so can you do a drum kit with 4 mics? You can. Is it optimal? Depends on what you're going for. Just because there's been famous recordings in the past with just a handful of microphones on there, overwhelmingly, without question, the vast majority of drum recordings you've heard in your life are not done that way, okay? So yes, can you get by and make it work with 4-channel? Yes, you can, but you're best with 8, and quite frankly, even a few more depending on how you want to do it. So anyway, it can be done. I've got a video on there on how to do it with an 8-channel interface and do it effectively, okay? So That recording interface, you're going to want to pick the right one. Now, here's where you can also look on a site called reverb.com. It's just basically the eBay of music instruments, except you're not auctioning and they're all set prices. So if I want to sell a piece of gear in my studio, then I would post that on Reverb as an example, and someone across the country or wherever, depending on where I'm willing to ship it to, can buy it. They pay for it through Reverb. I ship it to them. I get my money and transaction done. It's a great experience. I've never had a bad experience. Okay, now there are people who have, but I personally, and I've done it a lot, never had a bad experience. And it's quite safer than dealing with a Facebook marketplace where you never know if that person meeting up with you is coming to rob you or something like that. But you can save quite a bit of money buying used on things like this, okay? So, but you have to make that decision as far as what you want to do, okay? And then so now that we've talked about recording interfaces, we've talked about the computer, the next key component is your digital audio workstation. And there's a lot of great choices out there. Now, if you're on Windows, if you're going to be going with a Windows computer, you need to make sure that the ones you're considering work on Windows, because not all of them do, okay? All of them work on Mac, but not all of them work on Windows. Most of them do, but not all of them. So some of the great choices out there is you've got Pro Tools out there, probably the most known by most people who, let's say, don't know any better. Pro Tools was considered the quote-unquote industry standard, joke, for a long time, and it was, but today it's not. You are going to spend the most money on Pro Tools because they want you to subscribe to it. So you're paying forever and you never own it. My personal opinion, I was a 20-plus year user of Avid / DigiDesign and Pro Tools, and I completely said, forget it, no more. You're not taking my money like this crazy anymore. I want to buy it and I want to own it, okay? And so keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. But if you want to go that route, just understanding it's coming at a cost that's higher than any of the others, okay? Because every month or every year you're having to repay just to have the right to continue using something, whereas if you buy a DAW outright, you own it, okay? So next up, you've got Studio One. Studio One's made by a company by PreSonus, and it is a fantastic digital audio workstation. Fantastic, relatively easy to learn and get going in, okay? After that, you've got Cubase, okay? Cubase works on Mac and Windows, as does Studio One, Mac and Windows, as does Pro Tools, Mac and Windows, okay? But, all these will run fine on those. But Studio One is absolutely fantastic. It's a great bang for the buck. Next up, the best bang for the buck as far as full-featured, especially if you're going to use virtual instruments and things like that. So just picture a piano instead of a physical piano. Now you can do that inside the box within the virtual instrument. You can do synthesizers, strings, drums, all these things you can do inside the DAW. And Logic comes with everything you need to do all of that. So if you're going Mac, you strongly want to consider Logic because it's only $200, okay? $200 out the door. That is a steal, okay? Then, like I said, you've got Cubase. Cubase is incredibly powerful, and especially on the virtual instrument, the MIDI side of things, it's just a very compelling DAW that honestly is better suited. Historically, it's run better on Windows than it has Mac. Now, when I left Avid and Pro Tools, I tried Studio One. I really enjoyed it. But the control surfaces that I use, and if you want to know what that is, just Google control surfaces, digital audio workstation control surfaces. They just worked better in the Cubase / Nuendo. Now, Cubase and Nuendo are basically the same thing, except Nuendo also has a lot of features for what you call post-production. That's for film and where video and things like that are involved. And so it brings a lot of features. Cubase is more than enough for 99.9% of the people. But I happen to get a great deal on Nuendo, so I'm using Nuendo today. It's my particular DAW of choice. But just because that's mine doesn't mean that's right for you, all right? So you've got that as an option. You've also got things like Ableton, okay? Ableton, especially if you're going to do a lot of electronic-based stuff, is very, very, very popular, especially by the younger generation, okay? And so you can do tremendously amazing things with Ableton. So that's another one to consider. Now, the one that's out there that when you find users that use it, they absolutely love it, okay? And that's a DAW called Reaper, okay? Reaper was just basically a couple of guys who worked in this industry before. They got together, created a company, made a bunch of money, and now they just kind of do this for fun. And so Reaper, I think, you know, to buy it is like $60 to $100 and something, but it's very inexpensive. If you're just doing audio, absolutely a great choice, a great choice. You know, is it as full-featured MIDI-wise and virtual instruments and things like that as others? Not so much. Now, I want to talk about one thing to consider when you're trying to decide on the right digital audio workstation are the included plugins, what we call stock plugins that come free. Now, if you're not familiar what a plugin is, I'm sure most of you are familiar with an equalizer. You get in your car, you turn up the bass, maybe you crank down the treble a little bit, maybe you adjust the mid, so you kind of got that little curve like that going on if you're doing a graphic EQ, and you get that set just right. That's an equalizer, oversimplified compared to what we're doing. But say, for example, where that's done, you know, traditionally in what we call hardware units, individual equalizers. So if you needed 10 equalizers, you had to own 10 separate equalizers. With plugins, you can use that same plugin over and over and over as many times as your computer will process it. And with things like that, you'll never run out, trust me. But anyway, what they call the stock plugins, whether they're compressors, equalizers, reverbs, delays, all these things that are vital to your mixing of your music, the stock plugins that come with it. And then do they come with virtual instruments? In other words, if you want to use virtual instruments, whether you want strings in the background, whether you want organs like a B3 or a piano or something like that, that's done within the virtual instruments. So when you look at Pro Tools as an example, I would say the stock plugins are just kind of meh. No. So they've got some decent virtual instruments. I will give them that. When you go into Studio One's plugins are very good that come with it. As are Cubase, their plugins are very good that come stock with it. And Logic plugins are actually exceptional for what you're getting for your bang for your buck. Now, some of those others offer limited virtual instruments, right? Logic comes with a boatload of really super high quality virtual instruments and plugins where you can get by without having to buy anything else on top of that. You can create great music with just the plugins and the virtual instruments that come with it. So you really want to think about that. I strongly encourage you, if you get into this, a lot of people get into immediately buying third-party manufacturer plugins and things like this because they think they're going to transform their world. And the reality, there are some really great plugin manufacturers out there today. But I would say master and learn the art of using what comes with your DAW before you even consider any of that, okay? So again, these are the basic components that you have to consider or you should consider when getting into this. To give you roundabout numbers, I already talked before, for $600 you can get a great brand new Macintosh Mac Mini as long as you've got a computer monitor and a keyboard and a mouse to pair it up with because they don't come with those things, okay? But the keyboard and mice are relatively dirt cheap these days, okay? As are monitors. You can get monitors really inexpensively, okay? So you've got that option. Or you can build a Windows PC that can certainly get you going for that same price range, but you have to learn how to build it and things like that. Or if you have a friend that can do it, you can do that, all right? So roughly for about $600 is really kind of the starting point. Anything less than that, expect to have some problems, okay? Next up, your digital audio workstation. Like I said, you can get that anywhere from $60 to $400, okay? Somewhere in that range. That's what you're going to be able to get it for. And there's lots of options out there, even beyond the ones I talked about. The ones I talked about are probably the most popular, but there's certainly others that are really, really good out there as well, okay? And then lastly, your recording interface. Like I said, you can get something that will serve you very well for getting started from anywhere from a couple $100 to maybe up to $400, depending on whether you need 2 or 4 inputs. Lots of great choices out there in that price range today that will give you very, very, very good results, okay? So hopefully this has kind of helped you get an understanding of what you need to get started. And then later on, I'll do some other videos on how to really optimize and how to do certain things within your digital audio workstation and things like that at later videos down the road. So I hope you found this helpful. Again, do me a favor if you have. It's really important. Take that extra second and just go subscribe to the channel. It really helps me grow this channel so I can help more people like you. But until next time, I hope all of you have a great day. Bye-bye.